Whenever you express your atheism outside of like the American Atheist Annual Convention, you're likely to have to deal with one of these motherfuckers who thinks that religion serves some kind of a purpose. Right? Maybe it'll come from a religious person, or maybe it's just from one of those hyper elitists who will admit that you and I don't need religion, but all them misguided normies do. And the purpose, as they generally see it, is to make people more moral, to help them tamp down on their more like antisocial reflexes and weigh unethical actions against divine punishment. Now, the standard atheist retort here is usually to point out how much less ethical religious people are than non-religious people, even if we, let them load up the category of moral with a bunch of irrelevant shit like not getting divorced and knowing what the Bible says. But as C.S. Lewis points out in Mere Christianity, that's not quite the knockdown, drag-out argument that we often present it as. After all, if religion makes one more moral, then it stands to reason that people who have problems being moral would be more likely to seek its services. So, with apologies to Lewis for using so much better an analogy than whatever lawnmower fucking shit that he came up with, pointing out that atheists are more moral than Christians in this instance is kind of like pointing out that people on diets are heavier than people who aren't on diets, and then using that fact to say that diets don't work. Now, that's far from a perfect analogy. It's good in that diets don't actually work, but it also assumes that people come to religion because they feel they need its services rather than because they were indoctrinated as children, which the evidence doesn't support. But it does poke enough of a hole in the atheist rebuttal that it needs to be addressed. So here's my proposal. So first of all, let's just set aside the argument that being Christian makes one moral. I think even most Christians would dismiss this, right? Because anybody can just say the Jesus words, and the common Christian definition of Christian excludes a lot of people who would self-identify under that label even before they need a no true Scotsman fallacy. Right? Like being Christian in the minds of a Christian means more than answering Christian when somebody asks your religion. So instead of using the metric of people who say they're Christian, let's use the metric of doing Christianity. Now, we obviously can't objectively measure one's humility or whether they were thinking about Jesus or heaven or hell when they made such and such a decision, but luckily we don't have to. We have a proxy that serves our purpose, because if the claim is that doing Christianity imparts morality and that doing so gains religion a social value to offset its social cost, then we have to believe that going to church counts as doing Christianity, right? Because otherwise, even if religion could impart morality, we'd have no evidence that it was imparting morality. In other words, if going to church doesn't count as doing Christianity, then you can no longer argue that churches serve a positive social function, even if Christianity did. The implication, therefore, is that Christians will, generally speaking, be at their most moral while they're in church, and their second most moral right afterwards, right after they've drank from the font of morality that is their faith. So here's how I propose we test this. I want you to go to find the nearest and most honest person in your life that has ever waited tables for a living. And I want you to ask them about that Sunday afternoon crowd. Ask them how moral that fresh from church Christian was compared to like a bunch of stoned teenagers staggering in for 4 waters and a shared plate of cheese sticks at 10:30 p.m. Ask them how well the Christians tipped. Asked them how often they left a little come to Jesus notes on the tip, or instead of the tip, or at its fucking worst, disguised as the tip. Ask them how many of those people chastised them for not being in church instead of at work on Sunday, as though they were at work because the server chose to be there and not because the fucking customer chose to be there. Ask them how trivial their complaints were, how messy their tables were, how rude they were, how ungrateful they were, how ungenerous they were. And use that to fill out Christianity's report card. You probably won't be surprised to learn that this thought occurred to me last Sunday afternoon when my wife and I went out for some eats. We went to this diner one town over, and we timed it such that a huge church group was already seated when we got there. And it's a small diner, so they took up damn near the whole place. It was this church group and like 3 other booths. And when we got there, most of the tables from the Christian group were just finishing up their food, and a few of them were already done. And when we left, they were all still there. The kitchen was running super slow at this point. We were there for over an hour. Now, consider that from the perspective of the business owner or from the servers, right? Big group comes in, fills up your restaurant. That's great, right? But then they just fucking sit there through all of lunch rush for over an hour after they're done eating. 14 tables worth of well-dressed rednecks keep you running back and forth for drink refills and extra napkins instead of getting the fuck up and freeing that table up for the next customer. Now, of course, if you asked the Christian booth hogs, they'd be shocked at any accusation of assholery. After all, visiting with your fellow church members, socializing with them, learning about their lives, engaging with their problems, that's all moral shit. But in this instance, it's moral shit at somebody else's expense. And it's also moral shit that could happen in the fucking parking lot or in your living room or literally anywhere but the only six-top in Stella's station this afternoon. And as I watched it, I realized what a perfect microcosm it was of the problem with Christian morality. Because what church actually imparts isn't ethics, it's in-grouping. It's a sense of belonging that gives you identity by blinding you to the people around you or straight up demonizing them. There's a privilege in belonging to a large group that allows you to rewrite the social norms, right? Rewrite the rules of right and wrong. Consider a group of 12 people in a restaurant breaking out in applause and compare that to if like just two guys did it. That's what religion imparts. It imparts a self-reinforcing feeling of moral rectitude in spite of one's assholery. That's its product. And that's how we should assess its value.